Good morning and welcome to the Roundtable. We've got Eric Nalin, young Ian Boyd, and are we allowed to say her name? This is Bear Shark. We've got Bear Shark with us today.
This is number 4. That's what I've been calling her.
You're at this point, they don't even get names. It's all numerical.
Text number 4.
Okay, that's great. That's good. It's a nice way for you to keep score and them to know their pecking order. I think that's a really good way of approaching it. Yep. We are done with fall camp, as if fall camp really ever ends, but we are now starting to move over into prep for week 1. I understand that probably not all of that prep is going to be used on Colorado State. But before we get to that, I would love to just talk a little bit about fall camp, just in a very general sense, and we can get as specific as we want to here, Eric. But if you were to recap this camp, based on your experience following the team over your career, how would you rate this camp? Where did this one fall? Is this kind of, would you say, an average camp, above average camp? What were some of the highlights for you?
I think it was a good camp. And, it kind of goes back to what we first heard in June when the team returned after the lull from spring ball. The sources felt like they just picked up right where they left off. There was no shaking off the rust from having the entire month of May off or anything like that. So they just kind of carried that all the way through in the fall. And, it goes back again to how much competition they have. People can't afford to have too many off days because you're going to lose your spot real quick if you do so. The stories for me were, the bad news, of course, is the 2 injuries to the running backs. That's always, Texas is going to feel that at some point this season. They're going to miss CJ Baxter. They're going to miss having Christian Clark back there as the depth piece. So I think, that's one of the negatives, one of the few negatives. On the bright side, everybody else was healthy. They're going to go into the season without very few nicks and bruises. A lot of the dings were very minor. Guys might miss a practice here or there, but it's just precautionary. So that's good news. My main takeaway overall is probably that the defense had a really good camp. I heard pretty much everything that I wanted to. The concerns I had throughout the entire offseason are starting to be allayed. I need to see it, visual evidence for myself going into the season. But it sounds like team-wide defense and coordination is good. And another question that they had, the secondary depth and overall talent. Jahdae Barron playing corner is a huge story to me. I feel a lot more confident about the defense than I did a month or two ago. Still want to see more. There's a lot to go. They're going to have to play together. They're going to have to play through, a lot of adversity. The old wooden ship. They're going to have to play through that and get better week to week. But I'm real bullish. I have little concerns about the offense. There's going to be some quirk that shows up this season. It does every year with the start team that we don't know in advance that what it is, and it kind of becomes the narrative for the season. Last year was red zone and the lack of cohesion on defense between the linebackers and the secondary. Something's going to pop up that we're not aware of, but right now I feel really optimistic based on the camp.
You were really, one of your concerns was prior to camp were run fits. Was that something? I know that you mentioned the secondary and obviously overall defense cohesion, but have you heard positives about the run fits? Is that something that you're no longer wholly concerned about, or is it still an evidence issue? You need a bigger sample size.
We're going to learn a lot more in week 2 about it. Ian was right to say that run fits weren't a huge issue last year, but we have this big disruption in the ecosystem of losing those 2 really good defensive tackles and them having to change things up for their new pieces. They're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul in the secondary for the run fits, I think. But they've got the smart, high IQ players, willing tacklers to do it. I think that Johnny Nanson's done a good job, but I think having just a higher IQ overall in the entire team, it's very experienced. Where they're lacking some experience, they're just awesome. Like Anthony Hill doesn't have a ton of experience, but he's just a hard-nosed, smart football player and a total freak out there. So you're not going to be nearly as concerned about them losing a stalwart like Jalen Ford. But they're just physically mature and experienced across the board. If they don't play good defense, there's a big problem with coordination.
Ian, this is the first time in a long time. Well, first time you're living in Austin during fall camp. I know you got to experience some of that. What were some of your takeaways?
Similar takeaways. I thought the main story was defense. Maybe specifically just all the camp reports that we've gotten have indicated that they are adjusting in significant ways to account for losing Sweat and Murphy, to make the most of a veteran secondary, to improve the pass defense overall with more and better man coverage and different different and better pressure. So everything that we hear on defense makes total sense. Sounds like it's going to make the best use of the roster. And then you get the other confirmation that it seems to be working pretty well against their offense. So I think we know that the offense is going to be pretty good. So to hear that the defense is doing well makes me think that the overall fall camp has been great. I do have like minor hesitations about the offense. I just don't know where and how they've improved over last year. I'm sure there's things that they're going to be much better at than last year. Maybe I'm starting to think that maybe they're just going to double down on being really good at running the ball and throwing on RPOs and play action. And I don't know if like the overall like progression passing game is going to be like anywhere near Colt McCoy level, but I don't know that they necessarily need it to be great.
But what would you attribute that to? Is that because we've got transfers at the wide receiver position? Is it a time in the system issue? What would you attribute that to, or just not needing to?
Well, there's a lot of confounding variables. I mean, there's like you would want to hear if they were going to be throwing and progression passing a ton, you'd be wanting to hear that there's like one or two receivers that are just stand out, can't be covered kind of guys. And we haven't exactly heard that. It's been mostly like, hey, we have 6 guys that are awesome, but it's hard to differentiate them. And if you were going to like, if you wanted like a Colt to Quan and Shipley kind of thing, then at least one guy I think would be standing out a little more. And then, but then also if the defense is playing a ton of man coverage with really good coverage guys on all 3 receivers and at safety, then it's really hard to make much hay against that in practice. So
that I think is what you would attribute it to, is they're running a lot more man, and the coverage pieces are a lot better than they have been in the past.
But I think either way they're going to be dynamite throwing over the top. I don't think there's much question that when they get into good play action and they're sending guys deep, that's going to be nasty.
You simply don't create the same run-pass conflicts in practice that you do in game situations, and I think that's why we haven't heard nearly as much about the deep ball passing game. We have heard a little bit better about Quinn's improved internal clock and getting to a second receiver. We mentioned maybe more of that in the middle and beginning of the camp, where Sark was effusive in his praise for Ewers, making the right read, getting to the ball to the right guy. That might just be a function that I haven't asked that question as much in the last couple of weeks, and I'll probably do that for the next team update.
Well, when we're talking about obviously Ewers, that's a known commodity raising his stock, but who in camp, and maybe let's go ahead and structure this as maybe not even a starter, but they're progressing really, really well. Who in your mind, Eric, really raised their stock this fall camp?
Well, DeAndre Moore has us shifting our reporting right now. There's a decent chance that he's going to, not shifting our reporting, but evolving it, because that's what happens throughout camp. There's movers and shakers. DeAndre Moore is one that he might start outside. It might be that, or he might start inside. Sorry. It might be that he's the slot receiver and Golden and Bond are the outside receivers. He's had a good camp. He's physical. Sark likes physicality in that slot position. You saw Jordan Whittington is an amazing blocker from that position. I think he wanted to keep that. He saw some of those values there. DeAndre Moore's the best blocking wide receiver, and there's a good chance he starts. I don't think that's a coincidence. And then at the same time, he's got really, really good vertical speed. We've seen that a couple times in spring games, but we've been hearing about it since the day he arrived on campus. There's been, a few people, a few very vocal people on Inside Texas thought it was a reach. Everything we've heard about him gives me a lot of excitement for, how they evaluated that position in that cycle. I think DeAndre Moore's one, and then Juan Davis at tight end. Ian, I want Ian to talk about the value that a lead blocking or a willing blocker at H-back brings, because we haven't really seen it. It's a different element, because that wasn't exactly Jatavian's strength.
Do you want me to make you really mad?
Go for it.
They sort of had that in 2021 with Cade Brewer. It was not like real evident because, Cade Brewer was not like an amazing dynamic playmaker, but he was actually really good at blocking on some of those types of things for Bijan Robinson. It was part of the reason that Bijan was good, even though the line was nowhere near where it is now.
Yeah.
But it seems like Juan Davis is like even more violent than Brewer, and much, much closer to like Lake Travis Brewer being able to get down the field and catch the ball. So it's kind of like he's going to have a little bit of like a Kyle Juszczyk kind of role on his team, where he can move around and he's really violent and able to add and let them block. But he's also almost a receiver. That kind of hybridization he may end up playing a lot more than we think.
I think that's the case. I do think that's the case. We're hearing, in 12 personnel, I think he's the number one guy for that spot. If you guys aren't familiar with Kyle Juszczyk, he's probably the most entertaining person in football to watch without the football, when he doesn't have the football, because of how he moves around and just waylays people. Very, very fun guy to watch. But Juan's going to play a lot. And then I had a third offensive player, was Trey Wisner. And some of that's attributable to the injuries to the running backs. But some of that is, once he got his opportunity, he's good. I think he's probably the best blitz pickup running back. He's got a lot of awareness and pop as a blocker back there. And then he's got a really versatile skill set that I think just naturally fits third down anyways.
What is the moving forward, having this idea of the players that are obviously raising their stock? Do we see, how does that evolve when you're going into week one prep? Is it just now straight back to the depth chart? Obviously people are raising the depth chart, but let's focus on Moore as an example. Like, Moore is making some decisions difficult for some people. So do you see, and the reason I'm asking this is obviously because of Sark's tendency to kind of stick with some horses and not go through a wild rotation, but that is one of the deepest wide receiver rooms in the country. How does this play against Sark's instincts in some ways, having so much depth? How do you see him doing this? Because, I mean, even players like Ryan Wingo are going to struggle to get on the field given the depth that's in that room.
I'm looking forward to that narrative. And that narrative was justified based on last year and the year before, but he didn't really have the pieces, like you insinuated. He's going to have to go to a deep. We're not even mentioning Silas Bolden as a starter, but I've heard he's going to get starter reps. So he's going to go deeper into the rotation. He has to, but also it's to his benefit. Those guys are running around a lot in the heat. Keep them fresh. At the end of the day, with Sark, it boils down to trust. Does he trust the receivers to be in the right place at the right time? He has more guys he can trust, and then those guys are just basically more talented than they've had in the past. So I'm not worried about that. We're going to see that. There's going to be as much rotation as we've ever seen, more so than even last year in total. They're gearing up to hopefully playing into January. We're going to see a lot of guys, especially early in the season. But I think those rotations, the snaps at wide receiver have the chance to evolve throughout the season. You could see a guy that plays less at the beginning be one of the main guys at the end. There's just that much variance in the talent in that room, or the versatility in that room. One guy could really break out. One of those guys that's not starting could be the number one guy at the end of the season. That's how deep that room is.
If you had to pick, Ian, specifically in the wide receiver position, who do you think is going to make the biggest, I would say, surprise? Because I know when we talk a lot about how the slot is used for Sark. We've obviously, it's in the past with Whittington, it was a rather physical position. I mean, the guy left, I think he left campus with 2 touchdowns. It was a phenomenally small number considering how impactful he was on the field. Do you see anybody taking that over?
Well, I mean, I think Juan Davis is going to take over some of that, like high impact physicality, X factor bit, almost basically in the same position even. I mean, at times they used Whittington like a H-back and had him block. Then that's what Sean McVay was looking at when he drafted him, because Sean McVay is all about that kind of deal. So, I mean, Davis, but he's not a receiver.
Right.
I don't know if anybody can be unexpected. It feels like everybody has their receiver out of the 6 that they think is going to end up being the guy. It's hard to call any of them an underdog or a dark horse, because they're all so most of them are like highly touted and clearly talented.
Moore and Golden are the ones that will fit the mold of the physicality from the wide receiver spot, from the slot, where they're basically a running back after the catch, and they're fullback before it. Those are your 2 candidates for the slot. But Bolden can get there, and he's not going to play with that physicality, but he has that want to. When I asked who the best blocker was on the team at wide receiver, well, he's not the best, but he tries the hardest. He'll try to earhole you. Is Silas Bolden? So they've got a lot of versatility, a lot of weapons. Those guys can line up all over the place, and they're not going to pigeonhole one guy in one spot. They're going to move them around quite a bit. And they like those bunch sets a lot. So you really don't even know who is who from play to play.
We talk about.
If there's going to be one guy that's going to surprise and end up being way more important than you would think, I would bet, I think, on Ryan Wingo. Just because I think he's the most freakishly talented guy. And every time we get a report on him, it's like that guy's just amazing. Everything is football's easy for him.
Oh, man. Well, one thing that makes life easier is working with Laura Baker. She's the best.
I want to tell you about Laura Baker. If you're looking for a new home in the 512 or even at this point, let's face it, 737 area code, there's only one number to call. That's Laura Baker at 512-784-0505. As a member of the elite Andy Allen team with Keller Williams, Laura has helped Longhorns find the home of their dreams in Central Texas. Just ask our resident sex symbol, Ian Boyd, who moved all the way from Michigan to Texas with Laura's help. Laura can help you find what you're looking for in the 512, the 737, or even parts of the 254 and the 210. Just, give her a call at 512-784-0505. Her email is in the description as well as the rest of her contact details. She's a friend. Give her a call.
Let's move on to defense a little bit. What are some of the things that stood out for you, or especially how we might be thinking moving into the season now, Eric?
Gilbo.
Gilbo.
Yeah, Gilbo. When I picked up on that early, they let us have access to a couple practices, and I noticed in the pursuit drills that he was out there with Muhammad at the same time. And I said, man, if they're really hyping up Gilbo this much, then they're going to keep Barron out here. It just makes perfect sense with kind of why they talked him into coming back, and why he wanted to come back was to get more cornerback tape. And we started checking on that, and throughout camp, he just kept playing there more and more. And Gilbo got better at star, so they didn't really need him as much. Barron's still the backup, and Barron will still play there. But Gilbo is your number one star right now, and that's a huge. That makes the whole secondary better. Now all of a sudden you've got two, really high end cornerbacks. Maybe not elite yet. I think Malik is going to end up being elite, but they've got two high end cornerbacks like they haven't had in a long time. That's one of the stories. And then my guy, Vernon Broughton, of course, I'm biased to it just because I've been waiting for a breakout forever, but I think it's perfect timing for him. We've seen a number of defensive tackles break out, have one season, and then go. Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo, they played decently well before that, but then they had their breakout season where they got drafted. We saw the last two last season, and now it's Alfred Collins and Broughton playing next to each other. I expect both those guys to get drafted. Been hearing really good things about Broughton. Elite first step, playing the run better. He's right on time. It's time for him. He's got opportunity, and we're hearing good things. The team needs him. And then there's also depth behind him that's going to keep him fresh. He's not going to have to be out there, 60 snaps a game. So Gilbo and Broughton are my two stock-up guys on defense.
A couple of weeks ago, our friend Paul and I did a video basically on what to look for in these non-conference games. And one of the things that we talked about specifically with that first game with Colorado State, very good quarterback, very good receiver. Are we able to control the middle of the field? Because that seemed to be a little bit of a difficulty for us. Ian, it's a similar question to you, and I know I'm throwing you on the spot here a little bit, but in this first game going into week one, what are you looking for out of the defense that's going to give you a sense of, oh, okay, things are going to be a little bit better than I may have thought?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
I think maybe how comfortable their quarterback can get might be a good indicator. A lot of times when Texas plays these smaller schools, like I remember there was a couple of years where there was all this hype about Texas's pass rush with Manny Diaz or Will Muschamp, and then they would play this smaller school and there'd be like no sacks in the game. And everyone would be like, well, what happened? Where'd the pass rush go? And what it was that the other team would game plan where the quarterback was always moving, always getting the ball out within 3 seconds or less, running RPOs, running traditional, and just trying to avoid the Texas pass rush being a factor in the game. And so either either I'm curious if against Colorado State, if we see either that, where their game plan is obviously terrified of the Texas pass rush, or because they have like a veteran quarterback and an NFL receiver, if they just try to do their thing, if the Texas pass rush is prohibitive and shuts down their offense. I think that will be pretty telling. I know that, they're not facing Georgia's offensive line, so it's not a 1-to-1, but it could be an early indicator about just how disruptive they are or how disruptive other teams anticipate them being.
So same question to you, Eric. Is there anything in particular you're looking for in that first game? Obviously, we're going to see a heavy rotation of players.
Well, I think you mentioned Colorado State's strength of throwing it over the middle. We'll get into it a whole lot more next week. They've got a really good wide receiver and a solid quarterback. I think there are three factors of why quarterbacks are not going to be as comfortable as we've seen them in the past. Obviously, improved pass rush, improved cornerbacks, and something that we haven't talked about a lot that'll probably be more subtle, and it'll be something that Ian and Paul are more likely to break down. But I think the disguise in the secondary with the safeties, I think is going to be much more improved. I think the communication between those guys is improved. I think the IQ in that room is improved. And I think I've already heard about them disguise. You don't know which safety's going where. I've heard that's been a bit of an issue. And I look forward to seeing what they do, how that translates with quarterbacks that aren't used to seeing it. Arch and Quinn see it all the time now. But guys that are seeing it, and also at the same time, they've got improved pass rush and tighter man coverage. I think that's going to be I think the marriage of those three factors is going to greatly improve Texas's pass defense from last year.
And look, I understand that this is purely speculative, so I'm not going to hold you to this, but this is something I'm just curious about when you find yourself in this position. What percentage of this week do you think will be spent on Michigan?
I don't think a whole lot. I think they've already done a lot of that. Sark will have them working on a team and they don't even know it. They don't know what they're repping for. They're just repping things. And Sark knows they're repping for Michigan, but they don't. I think they're going to run two entirely different defenses just because of the makeup of the two. The passing game, more of a wide open air raid, a little bit, more of that anyway. And then Michigan, we still don't really know what to expect. I know there's a question in there about who's going to be the next Michigan quarterback. But we're going to see either way. It doesn't matter who starts. You're going to see a different defense for Michigan than you will for Colorado State. But he'll always blend stuff in here and there that they don't even know that they're repping for Michigan. But he's playing the long game and preparing them for the bigger games. But I think it's going to be a different defense than we see, and it'll still be more vanilla. The defense that we see on next Saturday is going to be something similar that we saw last year. When what we see against Michigan will look different than what we saw last year.
Anything you want to add there, Ian?
I think they actually snuck in some Michigan prep a year ago in the playoff months of preparation. Not a lot, but a little bit.
Sure.
What I've heard. I also heard that the Michigan style defense is like something Sark is very familiar with and has a lot of experience against because it's very NFL based, and he has all this NFL experience. Well, a couple of years at the Falcons at least. And so I'm sure they've done a lot, but I think Eric's right that they'll probably zero in a little more on Colorado State for this week. But they've been preparing for Michigan for like a year, basically.
As they're preparing for Michigan, Inside Texas is preparing you. We are getting you ready. It's football season, guys. So starting this week, we are moving to 2 videos a day. So be sure to like and subscribe. Hit that bell in the corner there so you're notified of when these things are coming up. But there is a ton of information, some insight. The deep dives with Paul and Ian are there. Inside the program with Eric and Justin will be there. Roundtable will serve as a pregame. And we're going to be going live before the game and after the games. So please check on that with us next week. We really appreciate you being here. Go to InsideTexas.com. It is the place to be for a great community talking about this team and this game. And we look forward to a great season. Thank you so much, and we'll see you this week.